千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Previously, I mentioned that the chapter title for 53, there are two titles. The first one translates to "The Tao is plain," and the second alternative title is "The Great Tao." So this is either the Tao is plain chapter or the Great Tao chapter, whichever way you prefer. And what do we talk about? Well, we started out, as usual, a couple of meetings ago with the sectional analysis of 53. And I think everyone recalls that we were able to identify several sections, 4 sections. And what we did was that we discussed line by line and got to line 12. Of the different sections, we started out with the first section, which was all about the Tao being the way. It's a travel-based metaphor for life. And starting in the second section, we started out discussing the description from Lao Tzu about the opposite to the Tao. That is the wrong way to go in life. And our purpose was to illustrate the right way by using the contrast, contrasting with the reverse. And this continues on. Lao Tzu in the third section talks about further examples of being opposed to or contrary to the right way. That's how far we got. So we just have line 13 and line 14 to cover, as you can see. So we'll do a brief recap of the previous 3 sections using 3 slides, and then we'll get into line 13. So with the first section, you recall that we made a distinction between ancient times and modern times. The Tao as a travel metaphor works equally well in ancient times as well as modern times. Either way, we're talking about the Tao as the proven path, either a path that's been walked on in previous generations, as you see on the left, so that it becomes a natural path for walking for all future generations, or in modern times, a paved road that is easy to drive on. So the proven path is simple and easy to travel. The ancients are the travelers who went before us. They left us the Tao Te Ching, which becomes like a map that gives us directions. It also tells us how to figure out if we're on the right path or not. So in ancient times, this would be landmarks. If you see this or this, you're on the right path. If you don't, you're on the wrong path. In modern times, the metaphor continues. It will be like road signs. There may be a sign that says, "Wrong way, do not enter." There may be signs that point to a destination that you don't want to reach. Perhaps the destination has to do with some of the unsavory things in life. Discord, contention, violence, all that. And that is your indicator that it's time to take the off-ramp to get back on the right path and then continue on your way to your intended destination. So as I mentioned, Lao Tzu wanted to use a whole bunch of examples to illustrate these signs, these landmarks, these indicators that you're on the right path or the wrong path. And that is what we got into in the second section. The signs that you're headed in a wrong direction, like the wrong way street sign, the do not enter sign, if you're going down a one-way street opposite to traffic. Now, when Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, he used the metaphor that was easy and immediate to the ancient people. That is, how a kingdom functions, how the ruling of a kingdom from the top down would affect all subjects of the kingdom, and therefore the agricultural production. And the agricultural production was nothing less than the lifeline of the kingdom. And looking at that, looking at this particular slide, the corruption of the courts, resulting in the fields being barren, the warehouses being empty, we can easily see how that would correspond to our lives today. So the corruption of the rulers would correspond to the Tao being missing from our lives. And one way to tell that is the case would be, for instance, if you find yourself functioning far below your potential. And functioning below your potential would be analogous to the fields being barren. You're not really doing what you could be doing. You're not doing as well as you thought you would. And therefore, the warehouse is being empty, that corresponds to this feeling of emptiness in your life. This unfulfilled emptiness gnawing at you, this void that is not actually a good thing. It is not the emptiness in your environment that reduces the clutter and liberates you. Rather, it's an emptiness in your heart, making you feel like there's got to be more to life. Now, of course, people tend to be somewhere between the extremes. What I mean by that is most people are somewhere between living up to their full potential, moving full speed ahead, having a great time, and the other extreme being a complete failure to do so. Most people are somewhere in between. So when that is the case, you can think of it as like a half-empty warehouse. The warehouse is not completely full. You're not enjoying prosperity. It is also not completely empty. It's not that bad. It's somewhere in between, but it's a negative sign without a doubt. If what you store in your warehouse is getting used up faster, then it can be replenished. And if you notice that in your life, then Tao cultivation will be the way to turn that around. That is, get your life to the point where your inner warehouse is starting to fill up and what it stores is increasing over time. So the usefulness of this metaphor cannot be understated. Now, Lao Tzu has more to say about that. I have the arrows in this particular slide because Lao Tzu is pointing out there's a cause and effect relationship between one and the next. That if there's corruption and chaos, it's going to lead to a lack of production, that's going to lead to emptiness, etc. Then what Lao Tzu does is that he zeroes in on the corruption, the Tao being missing, and then talk about the various signs of that. Again, using the same metaphor of the ancient kingdom. And that's our other summary slide. And I label it as the wrong path, 2 of 2, because it follows the previous one, which was the wrong path, 1 of 2. So in this particular one, we're basically lining up the original Chinese with the translation, with the ancient metaphor and modern application. So this is zooming in on the ruling elites, the court of corruption, when the rulers exhibit the negative traits that lead the kingdom to ruin. So these are all things that we can check in our lives to see if we ourselves are heading down the path of personal ruin. This starts out with a metaphor of the rulers wearing fineries. It just means a false front. So that means if you are more concerned about your image than your actuality, the reality of your situation, well, that's a red flag. Then we get to the metaphor of the sharp sword. That is, if you are defensive, if you are dismissive of bullying, intimidating against other people, as if you carry a sharp sword like the ancients, well, that will be another red flag. Then we get into overconsumption, overindulgence. That's the third one there. That will be a negative sign for you as well. And then lastly, related to the fourth one is related to the third one. So instead of overconsumption, overindulgence, we have hoarding. We have accumulating excessive stuff, material things that don't really help you. They just clutter things up. And this can also represent pretending that everything is going well, like the ancient rulers, living it up while the people suffer, meaning that you have that empty void that's gnawing at you. So that will be the last negative sign. So with all these, with the two slides, the wrong path 1 and 2, we have 7 indicators of 7 signs, if you will, that we're driving down the wrong street, so to speak, walking on the wrong path. So by contrast, we can figure out what Lao Tzu would consider to be the right path just by reversing on these examples and then applying those to our lives. So based on that, I want to extrapolate and share this particular slide with you. This slide shows what we can deduce in terms of the right path, moving down the right path in life by looking at the reverse of what Lao Tzu is describing. So then, rather than to live a life with the Tao being absent, and therefore there's chaotic corruption, in the heart of your spirituality, if instead you can live life with orderly harmony rather than chaotic corruption, that would be a very good indicator that you are on the right path. Number 2, if you are keeping busy in your life with productive, meaningful, and fulfilling work, that will be another good sign. If you are just going through the motions day to day, you hate your work, that would not be a good sign. Ideally, we can all be engaged in productive work that is meaningful, sustaining, and that fulfills a deep need within us to contribute to the world, to be of service to the world. And this can come in many different forms. There's so many different jobs that we can do. So keep this in mind. This is speaking to the right kind of work, the right kind of career. We're going to see this concept again in the next slide. Then, there's also receiving bountiful harvest. This is the opposite to the empty warehouse. This means enjoying abundance and prosperity, that there's always more than you actually need. You can put things away, save them for a rainy day. That's a good thing. That's a good sign. that you're on the right path. So 1, 2, 3 would be the counter to the first 3 signs of being on the wrong path that we talked about. So we got 4 more, basically. Number 4, being genuine and authentic instead of superficial and flashy. This is the counter, this is the opposite or the reverse to the metaphor of the officials wearing fineries. Putting up a good-looking front when in fact there's corruption in the courts. So if you are true and genuine and real and down to earth, that is being on the right path. Number 5, treating others well, getting along with everyone, as opposed to becoming very defensive, very intimidating, trying to dominate other people. To get along with other people, treating everyone, getting together in peace and harmony, a very good sign. So all of us in this gathering, we're actually a good sign. Doing what we're doing now in peace and harmony is a positive sign in all of our lives. Then there's enjoying the pleasures of life in moderation. So this is counter to the overindulgence, the overconsumption that we were just talking about. In the Tao, it is all about enjoying the good life. But Tao sages will be the first to say that if you overdo it, you actually cut yourself short. You actually end up with not as much as you could have if you go about it with moderation, make it last. So then, number 7, sharing resources in the spirit of compassion. This is counter to the final metaphor, the final example where Lao Tzu says that the corrupt officials, corrupt rulers, accumulate way more resources than they need. They hoard them rather than to share them. So this is the opposite of that. So these 7 indicators would be what Lao Tzu would point to, letting us figure it out on our own by looking at the opposite. So now you may be wondering, what is this stated explicitly anywhere in the Tao Te Ching? Well, this chapter is it. This chapter is the explicit statement. Now remember, in the Tao, the expectation on all of us is that we gotta do the work. We gotta pick up the slack, do the work for ourselves. We gotta discover some of these ideas, these concepts for our own use. It's not all spelled out for us. Now, in traditions of Eastern thought, there are other formulations about the right path in life. So for instance, in Buddhism, let me share with you that there's a different way to talk about the same thing. If you were to study Buddhism, you may come across this concept called the Noble Eightfold Path. So let me talk about that. First of all, in Chinese, you'll see the 3 characters right below that. So of course, not knowing Chinese, someone who is only a native English speaker may say, oh, okay, well, so then this character here must be noble, and then this character here must be 8, and then Tao, the last character, hey, I recognize that. That looks like this character over here. That means the way, so that's the path. So we have like a one-to-one correspondence, right? Well, that's actually incorrect. Noble Eightfold Path is a translation into English that is, it's a formulation that's stuck. So we're stuck with it, but it's not a real translation of the original. It's basically translators dressing it up to make something sound bigger than it was in the original. This is done all the time. This results in misconceptions, distortions. This is what I basically work against So let me explain what the three characters are that you see in Chinese down there, right below the English. The first character means 8. So that's actually the eightfold here. It's just the number 8. And then the second character there means straight or right or proper. If you were to actually translate this, it would be something like the 8 right paths, plural, because this thing comes in 8. So what are the 8 right paths? Let me explain. The first right path in Buddhism is the right view. That means proper understanding of life. It means understanding that our actions have consequences. It means understanding that death is not the end of life. And therefore, the actions that have consequences, those consequences are carried beyond death, beyond physical death. And this, of course, leads naturally into concepts like reincarnation. And this is also about the understanding that the Buddha followed and taught a successful path to enlightenment. And this you can recognize as being very similar to the idea of the well-trodden path that we talked about just a few slides ago. The paved road. The Buddha has mapped out this particular path to follow. The ancient sages of the Tao would say that, yes, all the people who have traveled the path, the journey of life, have mapped out a successful path. So then later in Buddhist history, karma, rebirth would all become explicitly entangled, or I would say included into the whole idea of the right view, the right perspective, the right understanding. And it also, there would also be Buddhist teachers who talk about the connection between the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. And by the way, when you talk about the Four Noble Truths, there you can once again figure out pretty much easily on your own that the original doesn't say noble truths. It just say, the four truths, the four key truths, stuff like that. There's no attempt in the original, in the Buddha's original teaching to dress it up. To the ancient sages like the Buddha and Lao Tzu, truth is truth. All truths are equally precious. Okay, and then moving on, there's also what we call right resolve. That's the second noble path, second of the eightfold path. That is a noble path. Now remember, noble is just a sort of a window dressing. There's no distinction between noble and base in this particular paradigm. But let's just accept it and understand it as it is. So the right resolve, what is that? It's a resolution to follow the path that's been marked by the Buddha. Now, for people who become Buddhist monks, it's renunciation. It's about giving up one's home, to live in a temple, adopting a life of a religious person, a monk, that is begging for alms, basically living a life of austerity. So this concept is all about peaceful renunciation into an environment of non-temptation, no ill will, so that it is all about loving kindness. It's away from cruelty, so that it goes to compassion. And this is very helpful for the monks to contemplate concepts like transience, impermanence, suffering, non-self, etc. For the typical person following Buddhism rather than monks, it's about the resolve to follow the teachings. And in modern times, it's actually the rare exception now for the monks to follow all 8 of the Eightfold Path. They actually can sometimes be seen indulging in overconsumption. It's the exception that actually follow the path as laid out in the original Buddhist teachings. So let's continue on. The third of the Noble Eightfold Path is right speech. No lying, no rude speech, no passing on gossip, telling one person what somebody else says about him. Maybe that's, a rumor or gossip that would cause discord, conflict, contention. It may cause harm to relationship. This, of course, corresponds with the Tao we previously, in chapter 52, talked about the Tao of communication, and there are specific instructions in that as well. Things that you should avoid talking about: violent speech, flaunting, and also the practice of doing more listening than talking, because that's when we learn. So right speech. Then we have right action. So in the Buddhist context, that means the avoidance of killing, injuring, harming, taking what is not given, all kinds of material desires, physical desires. These are all to be avoided to a greater extent by the monks, lesser extent by the lay people who follow Buddhism. And this, of course, leads to the non-killing aspect of it, leads to the Buddhist practice of vegetarianism. For people who are not monks, many Buddhists follow a practice of consuming only vegetarian food a couple of times per year during the full moon, new moon, etc. Different people have different practice. Then let's talk about the next one. Right livelihood. This is talking about work or career. This means one should not engage in work that is harmful, that is against Buddhist teachings. Anything that involves dishonesty, stealing, harming, so a Buddhist cannot be, as an example, a butcher to contribute to the harming of life, the killing of life. For the monks, it's basically talking about that life of austerity I mentioned, possessing only what is essential, absolutely necessary to sustain life, to beg for one's daily sustenance, truly a life of austerity. Then, number 6, the 6th of the Eightfold Path, is right effort. This is specifically talking about the right effort to improve oneself, to guard against the sense doors. This is exactly equivalent to what we were talking about, watching the portal, which is the communication channel that referenced back to communication, overconsumption, and then the eyes and ears. These are the sense doors that lead to temptation. So it's basically restraining the sense faculties so that you can generate wholesomeness in your life to avoid that which is unwholesome in Buddhist teachings. Number 7, right mindfulness. This is mindfulness applied broadly. Being mindful of the teachings are beneficial to the Buddhist path. It's also about being mindful of present moment awareness. What is going on now? That is, never be absent-minded, go on about your business, sort of like sleepwalking, being consciously aware of what you are doing. So this contributes to, encourages the awareness that life has an illusory basis. Everything is transient. Everything is impermanent. Helps you see through the world. Helps you gain the enlightened state. Lastly, the last of the 8 paths is right concentration. And this is basically talking about the practice of meditation. And this meditation is basically something that can be done in a variety of different ways. Not just the sitting kind of meditation. It is also, there's more. There's meditation that is moving, meditation in motion. We'll talk more about that. There's meditative practice that has a whole world of variety. Now, overall, what you're looking at here, the Eightfold Path, this is the formulation in Buddhism of what the right path is. And, I thought that you might find it interesting to see the correspondence that many of these concepts have a very easy way, a one-to-one mapping to the Taoist teachings that we've been talking about. So having seen that, let's get back to the Tao. Last time we got to line 12. Today we've got line 13 and 14. Line 12 depicts the last of the 4 signs among the rulers that are corrupt. And the last sign being, of course, that they acquire excessive wealth while the people remain in poverty and the people suffer, the people starve. So I think we're ready now to go forward into line 13. This is next to last line in this particular chapter. The translation, this is called robbery. So let me expand on that. So first of all, we're talking about the conclusion from the previous 4 lines. When the corrupt ruler engages in those 4 signs for different behavior, well, that's actually robbery. Lao Tzu describes the decadent ruler lording over impoverished peasants as a criminal because the ruler is robbing the people blind. So let's think about that for a moment. This is rather brazen. This is rather bold in ancient times when the power of the ruler is absolute. The ruler in ancient times could order anyone's death at a whim. No need to go through the entire trial, judgment thing. Just by pointing to someone, the ruler can order the death of that person. Of course, it's not substantially different in monarchies everywhere throughout the history of humanity. In a European monarchy, it's the same thing. Absolute power. The king can say, off with his head. So let's get back to this. The decadent ruler is enjoying the good things in life while the people suffer. The decadent ruler is a common criminal, a robber. Let's apply it to your own life. This is the important thing in the Tao. So first of all, you are the sovereign of your own life. The question then becomes, what kind of ruler are you? How good of a sovereign are you at managing the kingdom that is your life? There's always a chance that you can be very sloppy, that you are neglecting the vital things about your kingdom. You can rule as badly as the worst tyrant. That's always possible. So the fact that you are sovereign of your own life and destiny, that doesn't help you if you do a bad job. If that is the case, then what Lao Tzu wants to say is that, listen, you are robbing yourself blind. What he means is that you could be having the good life. You could have happiness. It's within your reach. You're the sovereign. You can make it so. You can make it happen. But if you travel down the wrong path, you deprive yourself of the happy life that you otherwise could have had. So that's the main point here. Now we get to the last line. This last line translated as, it is not the Tao, followed by exclamation. Now for the vast majority of my translation, I used no punctuation marks. I avoided as much as possible because the ancient Chinese did not use punctuation marks. They used instead characters that signify pauses or the end of a sentence. In this particular line, I call it the most emphatic statement in the Tao Te Ching. Let me be clear and emphatic on that. This is the most emphatic statement in the entirety of the Tao Te Ching, and therefore it has special importance. Why do I say that it's the most emphatic? Well, let me break it down for you. In this line, the last line, the first character, fei, means no or not. The second character, Tao, that just means the Tao. So not Tao is the literal transcription of the first two characters. The meaning is, it is not the Tao. Then we've got two characters. What are they? Well, they are both sentence ending characters. Each one can be used on its own to indicate the end of a sentence. So this is actually ending the sentence twice. Now, this should not be too much of a surprise because we do the exact same thing in English. So this is not something that's weird or strange, mysterious, exotic from the ancient Chinese. It is a feature of most linguistic traditions, whether Eastern or Western, that if you want to, you can choose to end your sentence multiple times with multiple indicators to basically show how much you mean it. So in English, in modern times, we might say the same thing as, well, this is not the Tao, period. And you can already think of other ways in English to emphasize it even more. What if you say, this is not the Tao, period, full stop? People do talk like that. There's even more. You can emphasize it many times. There's actually no end to how much you can emphasize. You can say, this is absolutely, positively, definitely not the Tao, period, full stop. And you can even add, that's it, I'm done. In recent years, you can even add mic drop. So there are many different ways to add emphasis, but this, in ancient times, this is the most emphasis that Lao Tzu has ever added. Therefore, it is his strongest possible expression about that which he considered to be the farthest thing from the Tao, and the symbolism that he used as corrupt officials, indicating the sovereign you who is lacking the Tao in life. The corrupt officials have a very widespread impact, throughout the entire kingdom. It is potentially affecting millions of people. For you, that just means a lack of the Tao in your life has a widespread impact on every aspect of life. It can be far-reaching, and therefore it is extremely important to get your act together and follow the Tao. That's what Lao Tzu is trying to say. So this can apply to you in a number of different ways. Let's just summarize those, and then that can be the end of our discussion for 53. So of all the things that we can think of that is contrary to the Tao, against the natural flow of the Tao, Lao Tzu would say that the following are the most extreme, and this is using the 4 lines that we have talked about, the 4 lines indicating fineries, luxuries like a false front, sharp swords used to intimidate other people, food and drink representing overconsumption, excessive wealth indicating a hoarding behavior, right? These are the worst of the worst. So the most extreme, number 1, phony exterior that hides the awful truth. In this case, the awful truth is that life isn't going so well. But you project this false front to try to make it seem like everything is going just fine. So that's what the fineries stand for. That is the superficial facade. Number 2, tactics of intimidation against other people. Sharp swords. This is like interrupting others, gaslighting them, using various ways to basically shut them off so you don't have to listen to them pointing out about how bad things are. So this is another extreme negativity. Then there's the self-serving ego that only cares about its own desires. This links to the overconsumption, overindulgence. That's what they point to. It points to the self-serving ego. Lastly, the hoarding behavior. Well, that is a lack of empathy for the suffering of others. So there you go. These are the 4 aspects that Lao Tzu would say are the most extreme when it comes to being contrary to the Tao. Therefore, this chapter is his warning about what we must all avoid. That is the overall point. So we are now ready to go into the paraphrase of Tao Te Ching chapter 53. The idea behind the paraphrase is to convey the original using modern language. So here, it is not as concerned about translation accuracy, but we must be very accurate in conveying the original meaning of Lao Tzu. So for section 1, I would paraphrase it as follows. If I have even a little bit of sense, I would follow the Great Tao. The only thing I would be afraid of is straying from it and ending up on the wrong path. The Great Tao is like a wide road, easy for us to travel. However, many people wish to gain some sort of advantage by following what they believe to be a shortcut. Thus, they are lured by the temptation of side paths. In this particular paraphrase for the first section, I definitely want to bring out the intent of this entire chapter, which is to compare, contrast the right path and the wrong path. So now we're ready for sections 2 and 3, which are all about specific descriptions of the wrong path. So for section 2, with the kingdom-based metaphor, here's the way that I would like to paraphrase. The kings and nobles are an example of this. Because of their corruption and neglect, the people suffer. The fields produce no crops, and the warehouses have nothing to store. So this is pretty straightforward. The only thing to keep in mind here is that there's a very easy and straightforward comparison that we can bring to our lives. Then Lao Tzu zooms in on the corrupt rulers, the corrupt nobles. And here's the paraphrase I want to offer. The rulers should be concerned about this, but they are not. All they do is dress in fineries, strut around brandishing sharp swords, fill themselves up with wine and food, and accumulate more wealth and goods than they can possibly use. So just another way to state the original, and we're sticking close to what the original expresses. And ironically, our paraphrase a lot of times is actually closer to the original than many of the so-called translations available today. Let's tackle the last section. This is what we have just talked about, robbing yourself blind. Just like the king robbing the people blind if the king was corrupt. This is called robbery. It is not the Tao. Extra emphasis. So here's the paraphrase. Is there a difference between them and common robbers? Whatever path they are following, it is most certainly not the Tao. Now, with this last example, I think you can see that it would be, when you understand the original meaning exactly, you can see that it would not be difficult. It would not be a huge challenge for you to write your own paraphrase. I would actually encourage everyone to create their own. So you may decide to paraphrase the last two lines by saying it a little bit differently. You may, for instance, you might write it as Lao Tzu saying, this is what I would call robbing yourself blind. This is absolutely not the Tao. That would be one way to do it, slightly different words, but you are preserving the meaning of the original intent exactly, and that's the purpose of the paraphrase. Okay, so the very last thing that we do with this particular chapter is to engage in a full circle discussion. And this is something that we do where we look at the very last line, we connect it back to the first line, and usually we can come away with a very, very different insight that amplifies the insights that's expressed by the entire chapter. So let's take a look. So what do we talk about at the very end of 53 of this particular chapter? Well, at the very end, Lao Tzu talks about the things that are most definitely not the Tao. The sharp sword, the fineries, the overconsumption, food and drinks, the hoarding of excessive wealth and stuff like that. Most definitely not the Tao. So how would that relate to the first line? Well, let's link it back to the first line, the beginning. Lao Tzu talks about having a little bit of knowledge or any knowledge at all. And we link it back to the end to form our full circle. And we remember that Lao Tzu talks about, knowing something, knowing just a little bit, or having no knowledge at all, I would still follow the Tao that is important. So when we put it all together, this forms an additional insight. And here's the insights. Even if we have just a little bit of knowledge about the Tao or don't know much about the Tao at all, we can still tell what is definitely not the Tao. So follow the arrow. If I have a little bit of knowledge, I can still tell what is not the Tao. What this means is that everybody has a powerful intuition, and there are times when your feelings are unmistakable, that your intuitive voice will tell you that something is wrong, that it feels wrong, it's just not right, it doesn't sit well with you. That is your inner voice trying to get your attention. That intuition can also be used to help us find and stay on the Great Tao. In this particular chapter, we've talked about the wrong path, and noting the signs of the wrong path helps us find the right path. That's what it's all about. So, overall insights, check your feelings. Does it feel wrong? Now, I think here's an example that I'll use from popular culture, from the confrontation between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, where Luke Skywalker is vehemently denying that, no, you are not my father. Darth Vader says, search your feelings. You know it to be true. This is a popular culture reference to say that feelings, intuition, are very powerful. If you can develop it, strengthen it, you too can become like a Jedi Knight. Your intuitive voice can become your most trusted advisor. Never fails you. What this also says is be careful of the New Age confusion of there is no right or wrong. We gotta be clear. There's no universal, absolute right or wrong in the sense that what is right to one person may not always be right to another. Rightness, wrongness can be dependent on the situation or the perspective. We can recognize this truth while also recognize the need for a personal code of honor. That personal code of honor is your standard, the standard that you never compromise. It is your integrity that you never breach in your dealings with the world. That is the intuition, that is the conscience, the voice of conscience that you follow. That is your primary means of finding the right path, steering away from the wrong paths as we travel the Great Tao. So in the end, we come back to the travel-based metaphor. We are all on the Great Tao together. It can be easy sometimes to feel like we're going to be lost. We don't know the way. If so, let us develop that powerful intuition to help us guide the way. Conscience will never fail. So let's take a look at the summary slide. For 53, it is a reiteration of the part 2 that we talked about before, and that's because the last 2 lines are just an emphatic statement about the wrong path being very, very, very opposed to the Tao, contrary to the Tao. So to the right-hand side of the slide, you're going to see the Chinese characters that depict the 4 aspects, the 4 signs. And so the summary is all about that. The first one there is about wearing fineries. And this is about projecting a false front. Therefore, what Lao Tzu really does not want us to do is to project a false front. This is what to avoid. Because, as I said, it is the most extreme of the negative examples that he could think of. So this means being true to yourself. This means knowing yourself. And this means being honest with yourself. And therefore, projecting exactly what is in the heart. And then the second one, the sharp sword, that's a very visual metaphor. If you think about someone wielding a sharp sword to intimidate other people, Tao cultivators must avoid that, must steer away from that. Any bullying behavior, any attempt to dominate or intimidate other people, that would not be acceptable to Laozi, not acceptable in the Tao tradition. Tao cultivators must use the soft approach, the gentle approach, the friendly outreach. So that's the second one. The third one, to summarize what we talked about today, the overconsumption, overindulgence. Here, I would just emphasize and stress that Tao cultivators are not like the Buddhist monks who are supposed to live a life of austerity. Tao cultivators are encouraged to enjoy life to the utmost. To the utmost does not mean overindulgence. It means to enjoy in moderation so you can stick around to enjoy even more in, again, moderation. So that's the overindulgence, overconsumption. That's the third thing that Laozi says to absolutely avoid. And then the last thing is to not hoard anything. Instead, simplify your life by discarding that which you do not need, and also share your excessive resources to the people in need. And this is a practice of compassion. And this is of course, this is the very opposite to the corrupt rulers who hold on to everything to themselves, even though the vast majority of it they don't need at all. That is just a waste of resources. So anyhow, that is the last conclusion of chapter 53. It's a reiteration of last time, and I hope because we went through the paraphrase and the full circle, it now takes on an extra depth of meaning. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.